right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jo Morris. I'm one of your Pac-West board members and education committee member, and I want to welcome you to our day 2 of our virtual spring conference. This is our industry niche market panel discussion. Before we get started, I just want to say a thank you to all of our sponsors. We have ND Industries, Pac-West Platinum Partner, Star Stainless Screw, Pac-West Platinum Partner, Brighton Best International, Pac-West Gold Partner, American Ring Gold Partner. We also would like to say thank you to all of our premier sponsors. We have Advanced Components, AVK Industrial Products, Empire Bolt and Screw, Pacific Warehouse Sales, and R&D Fasteners. And also all of the general sponsors that are helping us. Thank you. We cannot do this without you. And these are tough, and I appreciate your support. All right, everybody. During the presentation, everybody's muted. Our panelists, who you see up at the top, are going to speak for just a little bit to give their interpretation and a little update on their industry that they work very closely in. And then it's just open for questions. So we have utilized, if you joined us on Tuesday, you can type your question into the chat, but we do want to hear your voice. So I will also unmute you, but we'll stay in order. You can say, I have a comment, or you can type your question. I can read it, or I'll unmute you. So now I would like to introduce our panel. We have Trevor Borland from Pacific Bolt Manufacturing. Trevor today is going to discuss the power distribution and construction industry. We have David Palmquist from ND Industry and our Pac-West president. David's going to be speaking about the military, medical, and commercial aircraft industry. John Wachman, Desert Distribution Sales, is going to be sharing some updates about the renewable energy markets, including electric vehicles, solar, and wind. And then we have Baron Yarborough from Spring Bolt and Nut Manufacturing, who's going to be discussing energy, oil, and gas. So welcome, everybody. Let's get rolling. John Wachman, you are up first.
Okay. Yeah, you guys have asked me to talk about renewable energy and electric vehicles. We'll start with the electric vehicles because that's one of the reasons why we need all of this extra electricity. Electric vehicles, I thought were an idea that was going to take a long time coming, but in some recent conferences that we've been in and doing some research, electric vehicles are here. General Motors will make their last internal combustion engine in 2034. The worldwide governments and the U.S. government are basically going to make internal combustion engines out of date. So the world is going electrified vehicles. Basically, there's 3 types of electric vehicles. There's the hybrid vehicles, which basically have a small gas engine that charges a battery. They have a plug-in hybrid, which has a little bit of a larger battery, and you charge that at night. And then they have the pure battery vehicle. Most of us are kind of familiar with the Teslas that are rolling around. They've become the leaders, but all of the automakers will be following it, basically to meet government regulations. I personally like big internal combustion engines, so my future is going to be shrinking. I know David Palmquist likes to drive big gas engines, and he and I will probably have some relics that we'll keep. There's good news and bad news for us about electric vehicles. The bad news is there's less fasteners in an electric vehicle. As a matter of fact, there's less moving parts. The term they're using now for internal combustion engine is ICE. A typical internal combustion vehicle has 125 moving parts. An electric vehicle only has 25. They're simpler to maintain. Battery costs have gone down 90% in the last decade, which is going to make them going forward more cost effective. Although the bad news is that they use less fasteners. They use more complex fasteners because they're using some newer material, carbon fiber and composites. So the fasteners that they are using are going to be more more complex and a little bit more expensive. Recently, the good news is that our normal cars, the ICEs, have been using more and more fasteners every year. So right now that's a growing market. But as the electric vehicles take over, the curve will switch the other way. When electric vehicles become mature, basically the fastener consumption by vehicles will basically decline by 40%. The other good news for the people in this group is, for some reason, the electric vehicle producers kind of like the Western United States and the Southwest. Prior to Tesla taking over the old NUMMI plant in Northern California, there were no auto manufacturers or truck manufacturers in the Western United States. So the good news for us is that there'll be some new factories going up, factories that have actually gone up. But the bad news is that they're going to use less parts. Switching from the actual vehicles, and again, the electric vehicles use standard fasteners typical to the current cars, but just less of them. All of these electric vehicles are going to need electricity, and contrary to some of our political leaders, electricity doesn't come out of the wallboard in your house. Okay, it actually comes from somewhere. I don't think in the Western United States we've created a new electric power plant probably in the last 30 years. So the current state of alternative fuels right now, our country is 20% nuclear, 17% renewable, and 63% fossil fuel. So that is going to have to change. The first one we can talk about is solar energy. That is going to hopefully take the brunt of the power distribution. The challenge that both wind, solar, and nuclear have now is transmission lines. Okay, even though renewable energy is let's call it green, when you have to put in 1,000 or 2,000 miles of distribution wires, that's not very green. So one of the problems we're having with building new solar plants is the environmentalists, even though they love the power, they hate what the power does to the environment. There's a new solar project in Northern California that is going to have 14 square miles of solar panels. 14 square miles. It's the size of 7,000 football fields. They will have 1 million solar panels, 10 to 20 feet high. So, when we just think about solar energy, it sounds great, but the physical plant that we need to create large scale solar power is pretty amazing. Right now, solar energy provides about 4.5% of today's electric power, but that's up from 0.1. So it's up almost 40 times since 2010. The cost of solar energy is going down. 20% of the current solar energy comes from residential. Solar panels, there's two types of solar panels. The one is the common one we see, which is photovoltaic, which basically the sun shines on it and it creates energy. The other one is called solar thermal. I think some of us have seen that large facility south of Las Vegas, where there are 3 large solar collectors, and they have mirrors that concentrate light and it basically boils a medium that turns a turbine. So those are the two types of way we do that. The wind power, again, it's similar in that it's green, but it takes up a lot of space. The negatives are, three negatives. There's a threat to wildlife. It kills a lot of birds. They're noisy. They require a fair amount of maintenance, and they take up a lot of ground. Baron, down in your part of the world, there's a place called Horse Hollow. It occupies 47,000 acres with 422 windmills. So, these things are coming. The life expectancy of both a solar panel and a wind turbine is about 20 years. They do require a lot of maintenance. Most of the fastener usage on the solar is for basically repair and maintenance. We all think that solar panels and wind turbines, you just put them up and you collect your energy. Both of them require a fair amount of maintenance. Solar panels need to be cleaned. They sit out and they vibrate. There's a lot of thermal expansion and contraction that requires a lot of maintenance. The good news about the wind power is, and I'm part of the cause of this, when they do maintenance, they throw the old bolts away. They asked me and I told them I thought that was a good idea. I figured Baron would also think that was a good idea. The last one I'll just mention is nuclear. We haven't built a new nuclear power plant in 30 years. We currently have 5 that are going on. We currently have 100. 5 are being shut down this year, with 9 new ones out of in construction. One of the bright things about potential solar is Bill Gates and a group of folks have got a plan for small scale nuclear power plants that can be put closer to population centers, so that you don't have the couple of 1,000 miles of power cable. That seems to have a decent future. I think there's only a small handful of people who make fasteners for nuclear reactors. I don't know, Baron, is that your part of the world?
Very little, but
Okay.
I do have some nuclear knowledge a little bit.
Okay.
But I'll let you keep going, buddy.
Okay. The bottom line is that all of these new technologies will require fasteners. The solar folks, it's basically like an erector set. Most of the fasteners used are basically just to hold the structure together. The solar panels themselves are not very high tech. They're pretty generic. Most of them are made in China. The most expensive component in a solar field is actually the rectangular tubing that holds it up. That's where most of the value is. So that's a little bit of what's going on in our world. I think we're lucky by where we live, that a lot of the new technology will offer us opportunities, but also offer us some challenges.
Thank you, John. So instead of save the turtles, it's now save the horses, possibly?
Could be, could be.
All right, David, you're up next, but before you go, we have a couple of comments. The lovely Kim Scott wants to know, where in Northern California, John, is that solar plant?
Which one?
You mentioned that they're building a very large solar, farm in Northern California, and she piped in, where?
Well, let me see.
I thought you might know it off the top of your head. While you're looking, our other John in the Pac-West world, Mr. Reno, commented that when it comes to bird death, cats are unrivaled as the leading cause, whereas wind turbines only kill about 234,000 birds every year in the United States. felines kill 2.4 billion, according to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Thank you, Johnny G. All
Yeah,
right.
I think,
Questions coming.
I think John is correct. No, the answer to Kim's question, it isn't in the solar thing it actually is in right outside of northeast of Vegas.
Okay.
That one is not in California.
Okay. Thank you. All right, David Palmquist, you're on.
All right. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, John. That was very informative. So I got, as Joe mentioned, I got a couple of things to go over with you, and just a little bit of background. If you don't know myself or Andy, then you should. I am the Pac-West president, so that's a little bit important for you all on today. And Andy Industries and our Vibratite line, we basically handle all the secondary retention for fasteners and even unthreaded fasteners. But today we focus mostly on the threaded side of that business. And, I'm going to just touch on the military, medical, and aircraft. And I recognize it doesn't apply to everybody here necessarily, but also there's a lot of maintenance and repair that goes on with all that. So I think each of you is probably touching that in some way or another. So in the interest of time, like I said, I'll kind of blast through these, but if you have any questions or want to dig deeper, then just make a note in the comments, and Joe can pick up on that. So on the military side, it's really all good news. Before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now after the pandemic, that business has been strong. And it is expected to continue to remain strong as they're replacing, naval fleets and aircraft, and then of course all the ongoing perishable items or maintenance type items. That all continues to go with the spending being pretty consistent from what we can see so far. There is a little bit of a shift in newer equipment is very expensive, but it's also very capable. So you're seeing kind of a shift to high cost, low volume products if you're actually a provider to the manufacturing area of the military. And so, but again, there's a lot of things that we're supplying that are consumable products, and just regular maintenance and repair. So that activity should remain good. On the medical side, I think many in this industry saw a spike last year as the industry was trying to jump into different directions and build up on, ventilators was a big one, but that's not limited to that. There's a lot of equipment that they were trying to get up to speed to be able to deal with the potential demand. And so we saw that in 2020. So for us, it was a better year than normal, I would say, for medical. But also, I think it was a pretty good year for the industry financially. So what that means is we're seeing continued investment in technology. And we're seeing projects that were talked about before that are coming to fruition, and new projects that are coming up periodically with high-tech equipment. Those devices could be anything from like a handheld scanner for checking for like a stroke victim. Okay, things that would normally take a long time and take a high level of technical knowledge to operate. They want to be able to bring that to, let's say, a nurse practitioner type person to be able to provide better service. So that type of thing is all across the industry, and also robotics. So robotics are also expanding. So the good news about those is those devices, you have a new medical device that does something that didn't exist before. That device also needs a cart or a stand. It needs connectors. And the same thing with the robots. Robots use a ton of fasteners. So that's really good for our industry. And moving on to the aircraft side of it, I kind of broke it up into two: spacecraft and commercial aircraft. And the spacecraft is, our experience was they were not phased at all by the pandemic. So everything that we were working on prior to, during, and after, they just kept moving like there was nothing going on outside their building. And so that was kind of refreshing, a little bit scary. and very encouraging now to see how much they accomplished over the past year and how much continues to move forward. So we expect to see increased investment in those areas because those projects that are moving forward entail, going to the moon, going to Mars. You had the whole worldwide Wi-Fi where there's a net of satellites up there, and now you've got other companies jumping in to do these same things. So not only are the different pieces of equipment growing, but the number of companies that are getting into the pool is getting bigger. So that is really encouraging as well. And again, the spacecraft side of the business, it's not all NASA type product where you have a manned space flight and you have a 12-inch stack of documents that goes with every shipment. A lot of these things are commercial type things, ground support equipment, lab equipment, different things that they need for this quote new industry. And they all use a lot of fasteners. So, and different levels. So some of you may not work in the, fatigue rated, high risk, high strength fasteners. But there's also a lot of commercial stainless metric screws that go into different applications. So to me, that's really exciting for our industry. So as John noted, there's some scary things happening on the electric vehicle side, but there's some really exciting things happening on the space vehicle side. Obviously, volumes would expect it to be lower, but then again, costs tend to be higher because the risks are also higher. So now I left commercial aircraft for last because I think that is the most dynamic of all of these with regard to where we've been this past year. And so, commercial aircraft, the transport side, as you can all guess, got hit really hard because nobody was going anywhere. And, airports were empty. And if you flew during that time, it was pretty awesome, but you can't support that long term. So, I've flown recently and I'm finding airports are pretty full now. And it's also pretty hard to get flights, or you've got to, where you used to be able to go nonstop. Now you're flying 6 hours to get there. So there's a pent up demand, and there is a game of catch up being played by the airlines. But just a couple quick numbers to give you some perspective. Last year, the transport side of it, the amount of money spent on that side of the business dropped to 2016 figures. Okay, so it's pretty far down if you were to look at it on the graph. But the rebound is coming back pretty strong. So what does that mean is this year and the next year, they're forecasting that we'll be back up to 2017, 2018 numbers. And that by 2023, 2024, we'll be back to where we were in 2019 prior to the pandemic. So that's a pretty fast turnaround, and it's pretty exciting. And then, from 2025 to 2027, they're expecting an additional 33% increase. So, what you're looking at the moment is a 6-year trend. Now, normally in that aerospace industry, it goes about 6 years and then they see a drop, and then we go another 6 to 8 years, then a drop. It kind of repeats over and over again. The interesting thing about what they're forecasting now is that it keeps going up. So again, that's several years out. None of us has a crystal ball, but there is a lot of people that crunch a lot of data on this side of the industry. So again, for all of us, commercial aircraft is very important because there's so much that happens on the ground, food service, in the terminals, you name it, there's fasteners all over. And again, the maintenance side of it as well. So not everything is on aircraft in the air and you have to have an FAA cert or whatever. There's a lot of parts that go out that enter into that industry. So that is, that's really exciting. And I think that, we're going to see the benefits to that, because those things we're talking about kicking off in the next 3 or 4 years, for you and I and for our customers, if we're on the ball, that starts now, because the fastener manufacturing side of it could be a year out. Everybody knows supply chain is struggling right now. So if you want to be prepared to see the growth in 2022, you better be buying parts now. So we're starting to see that, but I think we're going to see a lot more of it towards the end of this year. And just a quick note on the plane delivery side. So I don't know if there's anybody on here that actually supplies parts for new aircraft. I'll just touch on that really quick. We're probably not going to see those numbers return to peak numbers, which was 2018, probably for another 2 to 3 years, maybe even 4 years. So that's going to be slower to rebound because there's still inventory. And then the other thing is, after that, as it continues to grow, it's growing at a pretty slow pace, maybe 8%. So that's what they're forecasting. So we're going to see a nice bump on the maintenance and repair side, but on new equipment, new aircraft, probably not going to be too dramatic of a change. So that's me. Happy to pass it on to the next panelist.
Thank you, David. So you mentioned that it's kind of doom and gloom for fastener suppliers for electric vehicles, but because John said they're dropping so much, but we got to remember optimistically that there's got to be all those charging stations, right, across the country. Yeah. So they're going to use fasteners. So maybe it's an even swap. I don't know. All right. Thank you, Trevor.
Hi there. I'm Trevor Borland from Pacific Bolt Manufacturing. For those who don't know us, we are a hot header, anchor bolt, and distributor up in Western Canada, but I'm going to try to relate this to my much smarter colleagues in America. I'm going to talk about two things: power distribution and transmission and construction. And I think just to build on what John was saying, I'll hit off on power distribution. We do quite a bit of work on transmission lines throughout North America. What we're finding, and if you talk to anybody related into that type of work, the transmission distribution is pretty fragile right now. It's basically close to max capacity. A lot of the infrastructure is older, has to be replaced, or has to be built in redundancy. I think, if you remember what happened in Texas over the winter, how fragile the grids are. So the other issue that we're seeing, and you talk to, again, some of our customers, is they're seeing a massive increase in demand around dinner time. So what's happening is people come home from work, they plug in their phones, they turn on their AC, they turn on their TV, they plug in their car, and the grids are spiking. And they're not designed for that type of massive spike in the evenings. So, you see Tesla coming out with some types of batteries, and your car will wait and charge it 1 in the morning, but you still have this massive spike. So we're seeing the issue is, how do we get the power to the people that need it when they need it? So there's quite a bit of built up work, and there's going to be quite a bit of development in this over the next 5 to 10 years. So I think it's a good sector to be in, and it's really interesting to see how it's going to evolve. One of the challenges too is, if you look at the way we do electricity, we have nuclear, coal, solar, hydro. When you talk about nuclear and coal, those plants run basically at a constant. They're always pumping out power. So they're pumping out power in the middle of the night, they're pumping out power in the middle of the day, which is great, but we don't use power in the middle of the night, or as much as we do in the day. So what do we do with that power? Well, we have to send it somewhere, so it goes to places that need it. Now, hydroelectric has the great opportunity where, when you don't need the power, you close the dam. The reservoir refills, that potential energy is basically water stored in a dam. The issue is, a lot of those dams are in Washington, Oregon, or Northern. The ones that are in the southern states right now are drought, and they don't even have water in the reservoirs to do this. So you have to get that power from the Columbia River to California or to Arizona. So we're seeing quite a bit of proposals or ideas where, how do we get the power to the people that need it when they need it? So it's quite an interesting time to be in that type of sector, and there's lots of potential there. As for construction, we do quite a bit of infrastructure work, and what we're seeing is, we're seeing a massive amount of infrastructure being built out right now. Some of it's due to COVID. The last year and a half, a lot of these bigger construction projects were on reduced workforces or slower, and now they're getting back and they want to get caught up. Not to mention government stimulus spending, which is basically going to really affect us all when it comes to highways, bridges, rail infrastructure. We're seeing quite a bit of growth in that. I think what the US government's talking about a $4 trillion infrastructure bill. If you think that 1 or 2% of that's going to be fastener related in a bridge or in any of these big, massive projects, it adds up quickly. So there's a lot of potential in that. But we're also seeing a lot of private sector stuff. Amazon's, every warehouse takes a ton of fasteners in the structural steel. And they're popping up everywhere. And a lot of them around us are new. So Amazon, Tesla's building new plants. I see Intel just announced a massive new operation in Texas. So that's all type of stuff that is usually good for fastener guys. It's any type of construction, uses bolts, uses anchor bolts, has connections. So I think that's going to keep going. Not to mention when companies are making a ton of money, they have to spend that money somewhere. So you generally see their CapEx spending going up. So for example, in forestry right now, we're seeing a lot of proposals for new mills or expansions to mills or new warehousing because they have money now in the bank that they can spend. So that's great. And I also think that we're going to see quite an increase in port construction. You know, the ports anywhere don't want to be known as the choke point. So I would bet that you're going to see Long Beach, LA, Tacoma, Oakville, all those places, or Oakland, sorry, all those places are going to see massive port build outs. Texas will see build outs just to meet up with the pent up demand because they don't want to be in a situation where they're backed up. So from a construction point of view and a power distribution point of view, I think it's going the right way. You know, it's a great niche to be in, and there's lots of potential for all different areas. So, Joe, I think that's about all I can add.
Thank you very much. All right, Baron.
How we doing today, guys? Forgot most of y'all are on mute, so. But yeah, so Baron with Spring Bolt and Nut Manufacturing here in Houston, Texas. So given where we're at, we're big into oil and gas. But you know, we're in a whole lot of the other energy sectors, a little bit of nuclear, a little bit of the wind turbine, things like that. But when it comes to my biggest bucket, oil and gas, you know, we can look at this short term or long term. Short term, oil and gas is going to be doing okay. We're going to see some growth. Recently, because of two main factors, a perfect storm kind of happened in the past year of the oil and gas sector. Usually when downstream goes belly up, upstream goes up, or upstream going down, downstream goes up. Now, upstream, downstream, basically upstream is getting the crude and upstream is utilizing it. Downstream is turning it into products. So the idea of pumping it up from the ground, that would be upstream. Downstream would be turning it into gasoline or turning it into clothing. A lot of clothes, about 60% of most jackets and things like that have some type of oil and gas product in them. Now, the thing that happened this past year, one, the downstream we had the pandemic, so demand was down. And then upstream, we had the Russia-Saudi issues. But in the next 10 years, a whole lot of people are saying that we're going to be slowly going up, recovering, especially in the next 2 years. What you're going to start seeing is a whole lot of the operators that are the bigger guys out there offshore drilling. They're going to be thinning the herds. You're going to see less of those companies. They're going to be growing, but there's going to be less of them. And the same with the people like in Alberta and the people in West Texas that are doing land drilling. You're going to be seeing less of them, but the ones that are the smaller companies that didn't get into a whole lot of debt in the past decade, those guys are going to be growing a little bit. But your mid tiers and some of your large tiers are going to not be able to survive just because of the new price marks and of the fact that they were surviving on debt and both of these things happened. Long term, I think the big worry for the oil and gas market will be peak oil. I mean, there's a whole lot of factors to play into it, such as a whole lot of the points that John brought up. Over 50% of oil consumption in America is vehicle. Now, some of that will maintain just because how are you powering these EVs? You're not just, like John said, you're not just plugging them into a wall. A whole lot of stuff still uses oil and it's running, just not directly into the engine anymore. But that is the big point there. I just lost my place. But in 50 to 60 years, it's projected that we're going to start hitting peak oil. And that's when, I mean, just like most industries, when it comes to energy, we use some non-renewables. Oil is a big non-renewable. EVs use batteries, which the elements there are non-renewables. The peak oil is when you start to not be able, there's not enough to pump. And that is going to be happening. Most project to be 50 to 75 years out. And I think that's when you're going to, if the push for EV and other fusion, solar, all those don't happen by then, they're going to be happening then, because the world's not going to have a choice but to do that.
Thank you. All right, everybody, if you have a question for our panelists or a comment, doesn't even have to be a question. If you just want to add or comment on anything, please type your question in, or just say, I'd like to be unmuted, and we'll give you a shot to say hello to everybody. Mr. Wachman, question for you that popped in. You mentioned that by 2035, it will primarily be electric vehicles. What's that number based on, or how did that, does that have anything to do with who's the president of the United States, or what's motivating that?
The automakers, the actual people who control what's being built, they need to have certainty, so that they're reacting to what they think the future will be, and in a way they make it happen. So in other words, regardless of what you and I think, or as Barron mentioned, I think there are some unknowables about where we're going to get all this electricity. Okay, but the reality is they are phasing out internal combustion engines. It's happening. It's not. It's not stoppable, because they're investing all of their plant and their equipment in this new technology.
It makes you wonder: are we going to run out of lithium for batteries?
We can always buy it from the Chinese.
All right, thank you. Mr. Fuller has a question or comment.
Hey, John.
Hey.
In Vancouver, we've had Ballard Power, and I think now Mercedes, is doing something, I think, with GM, where they're working on the fuel cell to electric, play. And I think that's is to solve the issue of not being able to go far enough on the truck engines. Is that being worked on? What do you see for that technology?
You're talking about the continued hybrid?
Yeah, the hydrogen fuel cell model.
Yeah, Joe and I were at a conference where they had a speaker. He used to run Magna, one of the large tier 1 suppliers. He basically said flat out, the hydrogen will be limited to Class 8 trucks. He didn't see any future at all for passenger vehicles, but that it is quite viable for Class 8 trucks.
Thank you. Did that cover it for you, Hans? All right, Trevor, you mentioned that the power grids needed to become more resilient with the weather conditions. What are they doing in order to do that? Are they just building more of them?
We're working on a few right now, but we're seeing where they're basically putting a line beside a line. So that way you can do maintenance on the original line that was probably built 30 or 40 or sometimes 50 years ago and still have servicing that area. So we see quite a bit of that where you can use the existing right of way, so to speak, and try to double up your lines. So that's one of the big things. No one likes. We really like overhead power lines from a business point of view,
Sure.
because they use a lot of telephone poles right up to the big, huge lattice lines that you see. Use lots of fasteners. When you start going underground, there's almost no fasteners in an underground line. So that's what we like overhead lines. But yeah, so we see a lot of just doubling up lines into areas. And you'd be amazed actually how many places too are reliant on a single line. So, and even Texas, what people don't realize is Texas is on a different power grid than everybody else. The East Coast and the West Coast grids don't actually work together. So if you had a lot of power on the East Coast, doesn't necessarily help out California. And now you do lose a lot of energy actually transmitting power through lines, through heat and some other issues. So that's also an issue. But yeah, it's, what we don't realize is that we think that, oh, we just plug something in and it comes from somewhere. But a lot of these, I guess, networks aren't actually connected to each other. They're all standalone networks. So that's, I think, one of the challenges we're seeing is how do we connect them and back up, or if there's a cyber attack or
Yeah.
that takes out a one plant, how does that affect the people around that plant?
Yeah. And that brought up another question. Colonial Pipeline. This is for Barron and for you, Trev. How's that affecting the industry, or how did it impact your what you guys do?
I'll take this. It's funny, actually, Keystone XL, we were doing quite a bit of work for the Keystone XL pipeline, which is a quarter done, and they pulled the plug on it. So it's an interesting thing because, again, there's another interesting thing that I think people don't realize is that you can have a lot of oil and gas in Texas, but that necessarily doesn't help Washington State because there's no real way to get it there. Right now, we're doing quite a bit of work on a pipeline up in Canada called the Trans Mountain, which is a pipeline from the Alberta oil fields to Tidewater to Vancouver, so we can get the oil to China. And we're doing a big LNG plant up here, but $45 billion plant to get LNG gas or natural gas to China. And I've seen a couple of them in California too. So yeah, so pipelines I think will always be around, and it's an area that they're building a ton of pipelines, but no one likes to talk about them because it's one of those dirty, nasty things that are a byproduct. So I foresee more pipelines being built as we want to become more reliant on our own supply and not Saudi or not Russia imported tankers. But that's what I see. But it's a fun.
At the end of the day, Trevor, I mean, pipelines are the safest way to move energy. And I think a whole lot of the dirty energy sectors, I think pipelines and nuclear both need to do a whole lot of work in PR because there's benefits, especially if they start using the type of nuclear that's horrible at making bombs, but great at actually producing energy. I mean, most of our nuclear plants right now are using, the 50s and 60s technology that was developed from the bomb. And we have better efficient ones that are way safer and all this, but everyone thinks of, every time that Chernobyl, or pipelines, they think of every time there has been an incident. But by and large, I mean, traveling by truck or any other means is way more dangerous than just putting them on a pipeline, and that's the safest way.
Well, you look at, they were only shut down Colonial for what, how many days? And look at the problems it caused for gas shortages on the East Coast, people lining up. So it caused, I would think that would have prompted more pipelines. So thanks, guys. All right, David, Mr. Palmquist, question for you. You mentioned how the increase with military, can anybody supply to military, any type of distributor, or do you have to have a certain type of credentials and certs? Do you have to be, can anybody sell to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. The short answer is yes. So there's no exclusion. But the military does require certain rules to be in effect for you to take advantage of a lot of opportunities. ITAR would be one of them. And none of it is that difficult. I think if you're already working in an industry that requires you to maintain a level of certifications, and you're having to document your process and your parts that you're selling. I imagine we do some work with oil and gas, and some of it is very simple, but there are other elements that are very high tech. So when you talk about the potential dangers with a nuclear factory, or you talk about the potential dangers with a new pipeline installation, as safe as it may be, they want to make sure that everything is prepared as it's supposed to be. I don't see military as being any different than that. If anything, military sales are about probably at least 20 years behind anything else you're going to deal with just the drawings are old, the processes are old, the level of communication is not as high tech. The spacecraft folks can decide they're going to put a man up in the space station on a brand new rocket, and they can get that thing done in a couple of years. We're talking about whether we can build another ship in the next 6 years. It's just different. It's a different thing, but short answer is yeah, anybody can get into it. There are some specific things, but I don't think anything is beyond the normal level of your documentation and quality system requirements for the most part.
What exactly is the difference between commercial fasteners and aerospace fasteners? Lot traceability or smaller lot numbers?
It's another great question. From a non-fastener manufacturer perspective, the parts themselves are the same. Really, it has to do more, I think, with the certifications. Sometimes it's the raw materials. Sometimes it's tolerances. But I would say that, we know of manufacturing plants that run commercial and aerospace parts, and they're really not changing their core process. In fact, I see Chris up there. I kind of put Chris on the spot. McCaffrey could probably speak more intelligently to that. Is on a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult is it to do a commercial part versus a aerospace part, and as far as how you change your process?
Yeah,
I think pretty much nailed it, David. It comes down to accreditations, specifications, not as much of your manufacturing capabilities, but what you're approved and your knowledge that you have.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. You're hitting up more on the paperwork, the testing, but the part's going to look the same. Especially in your exotic materials, you're looking at a bigger dock packet that's going to be heavier than some of the parts in some cases. But that's the big factor there, is backing up what you're doing, having your reports and paperwork like that. That's the big factor there.
I think when we're talking niche, it's if anybody's trying to develop a niche, know your customer, their needs, their wants, and their demands. If it's aerospace or solar, that's how you're going to develop a niche. And it doesn't matter if you're a big company or small company. It's trying to hit that sweet spot with why they're going to buy from you, and what service you can provide, and really focus on that that one piece that might set you apart from your competition is what we've noticed. It could be one specification or one accreditation that does it. And that's what we've noticed a lot in the transmission work, is we'll make one type of bolt that no one else will make, and then they'll come to us for everything else. So, that's what I would say to the group is, look at who your customers are, what they want and what they demand, and how can you exploit that or develop that to grow your business.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, because 5 years ago, spring bolt and nut manufacturing wasn't as much in the oil patch as we are today. And it was because those customers didn't need us. They were big into just buying Chinese B7 studs and nuts. But they put in regulations, both Bessie and American Petroleum, to make it where they needed fully domestic, everything. They needed big dock packs. They needed PMIs, mag particle inspections on all of their bolting going offshore. And that changed the industry. And it was in our back door. So we were able to figure out what those customers needed and fill that niche that was created by their industry.
Do all of your industries require primarily domestic or have special specifications for the product that you sell? So John Wachman, I was curious, for renewable energy, do you have to have a certain certification for those bolts? Is it just it's just per structural ASTM?
Yeah, the solar and the wind, they're buying commercial parts. The electric vehicle folks, because they're young and different, they've come up with their own plating specs just because they wanted to have ownership. But for the most part, no. One of the things I wanted to mention that I did kind of leave off from a solar point of view, we really didn't talk much about residential because it's not very exciting. But I do think Tesla had kind of focused on, you put a solar panel on your house, you have a battery pack in your garage, you collect the energy during the day, you have access to it at night, you can recharge your electric vehicle. And not saying that you personally can go off the grid, but you're not going to be depending that much on the grid. I live in Arizona. Residential solar is tiny. I would think that long-term residential is going to have a pretty good future.
Yeah, I think that, John makes a good point too, where, your niche could be regional too, where solar in California and Arizona and Texas makes a ton of sense. Up in where we are, it's not as useful because A, it rains too much, B, our summer days are really long, our winter days are short. So we don't get that. We get a bit of a difference. So, again, if you're developing niches, what's going on in your neighborhood? At the end of the day, a guy like me, once we get over, kind of like 1,000 miles, the freight costs are really hurting us. So I'm never going to be competitive in Alabama or Texas. So I think that's we have to focus on that too. To your point too, Joe, is it really depends on, I think, the sector you're providing, if it's domestic or import. Infrastructure spending is Buy American. So basically, we can't provide that service as a Canadian manufacturer, which is great for other. I wish I saw more of that, to be honest. But then other sectors, they don't care. A lot of the transmission lines, they want to go with the cheapest product they can find that meets requirements, which generally is actually Turkish or Indian, not even Chinese, because Chinese is becoming expensive. So it really, again, depends on who you're selling to and knowing who you're selling to, because if you come in with a domestic price and you're competing against an Indian manufacturer, you're going to have mud on your face.
Yeah, you're gonna get left out of the room. The same thing goes in here in the oil patch. We see it's who you're selling to. We see from them just saying they want DFARS compliant, all the way to not just domestic. They're going to give you a list of, this is the original mill locations, not just specialty steel, mill ABC. They're going to say at this address, this is where that steel needed to come from. So we have kind of a big range, but it usually starts DFARS and then goes to, you're going to buy from this particular mill.
Gotcha. Hans, pipe in. Did you have a question, Hans? A comment?
Yeah, I think one comment is really as an importer, I almost see those sectors, what Trevor's in and what Barron's in, as almost not competing with that market at all because of exactly that, of the specifications. And the other thing is speed. You know, you're talking an import where you're talking months out, where a lot of times the guys stuff you're doing is you know, these guys need it now, they need it, you know. So it's almost a different market, and there's really no point, you know, if someone gives you a spec and say, hey, I need blah 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 blah, you're competing with India. What's the point of even quoting it? You know,
And
quote what you're good at instead, right?
And that being said, we see especially in the construction industry, I see very few construction companies, even the Peter Kewitts and these big monsters, where they will go direct to an import model. They almost always want to deal with a local distributor or a local manufacturer. They very rarely will try to cut it out. There is a couple out there that will do that. But for the most part, they want someone on the ground when, hey, if stuff goes sideways, they can pick up the phone and call them, and they're not dealing with Shanghai or Kuala Lumpur or whoever it is. So that's where I think, you know, a guy like Hans, who's local, even though he's an importer, is nice because he's got boots on the ground here. So.
Yeah. You know, I think when you're dealing with a specific commodity industry, being local and having expertise is going to be a huge benefit. Question that popped in, and I'm changing a little bit, but John Wachman, with COVID, did that alter government funding for renewable energy projects? You think that their resources would be on you know, other things during COVID? You know, did that affect funding for it? Is that going to slow it down at all?
No, you know, most of the governments, whether it be the state of California or the federal government, they pick this thing out of the sky, saying, I think in California, you have to have like 50% renewable by 2030. I mean, that's law. The thing that I think will favor our domestic fastener folks is these large companies that do the industrial scale solar plants. When they get the government funding to build one, they're given a timeline. You have to have the materials on the ground wherever you're going by a certain date. If you don't meet that date, there are daily penalties. So even though they prefer imported fasteners, they have and they will buy domestic rather than pay those penalties. They'll pay whatever they can. So I do think, you know, with offshore lead times, I think I was told recently that if you placed a new order in Asia today, you won't see that until after January 1st. So people who need parts this year are going to have to go to a domestic supplier.
Yep. All right, we're running out of time, but real quick, Barron, I'm going to quiz you. What's the top oil producing state in the United States? And I know the answer. What is it?
What the top producing oil
What
state?
is the top oil producing state in the United States?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to say the Gulf of Mexico, because that's all I care about. I'm an offshore guy. I'm not for sure.
Trevor, do you know you're Canadian, but you might even know the answer.
I'm gonna say Alberta. Does that count?
Does our audience know the winner?
Obviously, none of you guys know the 50 United States. So, or maybe there's 52 now. I don't know. Gosh.
All
I
right.
want to say California, to be honest. I think it's going to be a weird one.
I'm going to guess either Alaska or Oklahoma. I'll take two guesses.
Yeah. John, what do you think? Well, Ryan thinks Alaska. Clay thinks Texas. I'm going to say Alaska. I really don't know the answer.
I feel like it'd be Texas.
You don't know the answer.
Well, I think we'll all Google it when we get off.
That's right.
How about somebody Google it now?
That's right. Google
Googling
it.
it already?
We're running out of time. You Google. I'm going to read my closing remarks. All right. Thanks, everybody. And this I thought was a great discussion, and I loved hearing and seeing everybody again. We're not over today. Please join us for roundtable discussions at 1 p.m. Pacific time to further discuss all of the virtual spring conference presentations with fellow attendees. And then you can find out what the answer is. Oh, it's Texas. Yay.
Hey.
Thank you, Kelly.
No, but also Mike Robinson, who used to be in the oil patch pretty with Dyson, who are you with now? Vertex. He said it was Alaska. So I don't know. Like, and because it could be either one. Those are both. I mean,
All right, whoever
Alaska,
gets the right
every
answer,
resident gets paid for it. So
I'll buy you a drink the next time I see you.
It is Texas, Joe. According to North Dakota's second, and it's not even close. Texas produced almost
California, number 4.
3.5 times what Texas does. California's
According to
fifth.
Google.
5.
That may be supply and demand too. So they may only be producing what they can sell. So
Baron, get busy. You're in a busy state.
that's right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Amy. Thanks,
Thanks
Jamie.
everybody for being here.
Thank you, everybody.